about you, but I hate code reviews. I hate having my code reviewed because I know it's not perfect and someone will find something that they don't like. I hate reviewing someone else's code because it's a huge context switch from what I'm working on, and I hate being yanked out of my flow. How can we improve our code review process so it's less painful? Hello, I'm Trisha Gee, and this is the Continuous Delivery channel. In this video, I'm going to show you 6 steps to improve your code review process. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you find the content helpful. When we're faced with someone else's code, often the first thing we can see is all the stuff we hate about it. Look at this code, for example. It has IDE warnings, it has terrible exception descriptions, it has weird and inconsistent spacing, it's got bad formatting, it's got inconsistency around the curly braces are, it's got a for loop which is secretly a while loop, and it has a whole bunch of other stuff I personally do not like. If I was asked to review this code, I would have a lot of comments. However, there's one thing that's very important about this code. This code works. It does what it's supposed to do. There are even tests for this code. So, am I right to have opinions on how nice this code is? Well, having opinions on code is an occupational hazard for developers, although I would argue it's actually an occupational requirement. We need to have opinions on code. We do often need to have an opinion on how code could perhaps be improved, or ways in which we could reshape it so it can more effectively meet the user's needs or make it easier to maintain. So what should we be looking for when we review code? Well, the answer is, of course, it depends.
We're extremely fortunate to be sponsored by Equal Experts, Transfic, Tuple, Honeycomb and Visual Assist. Equal Experts is a multinational consultancy built on applying the ideas and techniques that we discuss here every week and applying those techniques and ideas to writing software for their clients. Transfic is a financial technology company applying advanced continuous delivery techniques to deliver low latency trade routing services to some of the biggest financial institutions in the world. Tuple builds software to make pair programming easier for people who work remotely. And Honeycomb help engineering teams deeply understand their own production systems through observability. Visual Assist is a highly rated Visual Studio plugin with features to enhance developer productivity. All of these companies offer products and services that are extremely well aligned with the topics that we discuss here every week. So if you're looking for excellence in continuous delivery and software engineering in general, please do click on the links in the description below and check them out.
Let me tell you a story about my very first code review. I was working at a big investment bank and I was told to review someone else's code. I was given no other guidance. So I assumed that my job was to find problems in the code. I think most developers would think that when told to review someone else's code. I didn't actually know what I should be looking for. I didn't know what sort of problems might be lurking in the code or which problems would be an issue for this particular application. However, I did know what I do and do not like about code, so I used the code review to push forward my particular opinions on what the code should look like. There are 2 sides to a code review. There's the reviewer and the author of the code. As an author, you're already in a place of vulnerability. You spent time, effort and energy writing this code, and you don't want someone to tell you it sucks. As a reviewer, you hate reviewing code because it breaks your flow and forces you to context switch into something else. There are other problems with code reviews. Code reviews are often a blocker to getting code into production. And they also don't necessarily improve the quality of the code or the developers involved. So, are code reviews a massive waste of time? When we're faced with something which is a massive waste of time, it's a very good idea to take a step back and think very carefully about why we're doing this. So in the case of code reviews, why is your team doing code reviews? What is the purpose of the code review? For example, you might be reviewing code to check that it meets certain standards. Some of these standards may be automated, for example, formatting, coverage, and so on. However, certain other standards are more difficult to automate. Does it use our design patterns? Does it follow the paradigms that we normally use in our code? Often we argue that code reviews are to find bugs. I would say that humans are not great at spotting bugs when we're reading code. Static analysis, automated tests, and other tools work well here. However, a human review is valuable. Some developers in the team may be able to spot gotchas that most developers would miss. These are usually specific to your code base, and spotting them relies on the technical and business domain knowledge that the developers have. Some teams review code to ensure it does what it's supposed to do. This can't be automated. Well, you can automate the check. This is called an automated test. But the reviewer needs to make sure that the automated test really is checking the code against the actual requirements that were specified. You may be checking if the code is understandable. This is where less experienced developers are really good. Because if your most junior member of the team can't understand the code, it is not readable code. A very undervalued goal of code reviews is to share knowledge, share what's changed in the code base, share the new features which have been added, share the new patterns which might be being used. You might also use code reviews to collaborate on design. This is best done while implementing the code, not when it's finished. But you can be getting people to review your code as you create it to figure out if this is the right design to use. Next question, when? Now, there's two factors to the when. The first one is, when do you do the review? Most people or most organizations that I've worked at do the review at the end of the implementation. However, this may not be the best approach. If you're trying to work together to collaborate on the design, doing a code review when the design and code are complete is too late. So if you're trying to collaborate on making changes, you should consider reviewing during the implementation. Many code reviews happen when you're ready to merge the code. This is a kind of gateway review where someone stamps it and says, yes, it's good to go. Some reviews, though, could happen after you've merged it. If you're doing code reviews for knowledge sharing, if you're confident that the code works, that you have the right tests, and you're not doing a gateway review, you might want to review the code after it's been merged. The other when is the review complete? Have you ever worked on a code review where it just ping-pongs between the suggestions and the changes and more suggestions and more changes? You need to have a clear idea of when the review is complete. Is it when everyone agrees with everyone? Because that might take a while. Is it when a specific gatekeeper agrees it's good to go? Is it when every single comment has been addressed in some way or another? You need to have clear guidelines on when the review is complete, or it will never be complete. Next question, who? Again, there are multiple facets to this. Who reviews the code? Is it the same person every time? This poor person just spends their whole time reviewing other people's code and not writing their own code. Is it a rotating pool of experts? Is it someone who is senior and can decide, yes, this code is good to go? Or is it perhaps someone junior because they're very good at telling you your code is difficult to understand? Is it a mix of different levels and abilities? Do you have some people who are reviewing it and are able to sign it off, and some people who are reviewing it who may have an opinion on it, but are not a mandatory part of the code review process? Most importantly though, who signs off the code review? Is it a committee, in which case everyone needs to agree? Or a veto system where if one person doesn't agree with the code, it's not allowed to go through? Or is it one individual who considers everyone's opinions, takes all the comments and changes into consideration, and then makes a yes or no decision? If you do have more than one person reviewing the code, you need to decide how deadlocks are resolved when they inevitably disagree on what is the right way to take the code forward. Next question, where is the code reviewed? Where the team is located and where the reviewers are impacts your code review process. For example, a co-located team may not have the same code review process as a distributed team or a fully remote team. My personal preference for code review is pairing. You don't even need to go through a formal code review process. You pair with another developer. This way, the code review happens at the same time that you're coding, and you don't need any of this formal process around ticking boxes and signing things off. However, in reality, not everyone can or wants to work this way, and there are alternatives. A code review may be as simple as showing code to a colleague at a computer, either their computer or your computer. If you're located in the same office, this is convenient. This is a good way of doing a code review because when you're looking someone in the eye and reviewing their code, you're forced to be more considerate of the code author's reactions to your opinions. It also gives you the opportunity as a code author to ask a bunch of questions. Why didn't you like this? Or what is it you don't like about this? The other thing about sitting down next to each other during a code review process is that you can generally resolve a lot of issues much more quickly than ping-ponging backwards and forwards on a pull request or over email. You may want to do mob reviewing in a conference room. This allows you to get inputs from everyone. You do need a way of resolving any deadlock if everyone has opinions on the code. You can use tools like remote screen sharing via Slack or Zoom, or using pairing tools like Tuple. Or you can be doing your code review much more asynchronously in the IDE by checking out a commit or a branch, poking through the code. You will need a way to record comments and suggestions, even if it's just over Slack or email or a shared document. When most people think of code review, they think of a code review tool. I'm expecting most developers using GitHub pull requests or GitLab merge requests as a way of doing code reviews. If your organization requires a formal code review as part of the development process, obviously you're going to need to track that a code review happened and what comments were made in some place, and a code review tool is a standard way of doing that. Only now are we getting to the question of what you should look for in a code review. You can't decide what to look for in a code review until you know why you're reviewing the code, when you're going to do the review, who is responsible for doing the review, and which tools you're using to do the review. Now, when you're trying to decide what to look for in a code review, there are so many things you can look for. In fact, I wrote a whole series of blog posts on this topic back when I used to work at JetBrains. So feel free to have a look at that. There's loads of different things you could be looking for on lots of topics, including security and performance and style and so forth. You can't look for all of these things. It would take forever, and no one would ever want to review any code. Also, bear in mind that human reviewers should not be doing anything that can be automated. When you understand why you're doing the code review, this impacts what you're looking for. So, if your code review is to share knowledge, your purpose is not to reject the code. The thing that you're focusing on is learning what the code does and why. Feel free to ask a bunch of questions like, why have you done it this way? What trade-offs did you make? When you're doing the code review also impacts what you're looking for. If you're performing the code review when the code is complete, it's probably too late for design feedback. Yes, if the design is fundamentally wrong or very different to anything else you've done in the rest of the application, you should probably feed that back to the developer. But if the code review happens when the code is complete, you should have had a design conversation earlier in the process. What problems does this address? What does the design look like? Is this how we usually do things, or is it different for some reason? A design conversation doesn't have to be big upfront design with documents. It can be a whiteboard session or showing someone around your code. If your code review is happening at the end of the process, you should have had a very clear set of things that you're looking for. There shouldn't be any surprises to the code author at the type of feedback that comes back. Things like, your automated tests don't seem to be checking the actual requirements for this change. Or, your code seems to have made a negative impact on the performance and we're no longer hitting our latency targets. Or, you haven't followed the coding standards and so we can't let the code into the code base. When you do perform the code review when the code is complete, it is often a simple box ticking process, and the code author should be aware of what those boxes are, and they should really have checked their own code against those requirements before they even submit it for code review. Finally, let's talk about some of the mechanics of a code review. Of course, as I've already hinted at, you want to automate everything you can. Things like formatting checks, static analysis, compiling, building, running the tests, even testing the code can be deployed. So by the time it comes to reviewing the code, you should know that it meets the minimum requirements. Code reviews should be small. No reviewer wants to wade through 250 changed files. Another top tip for when you're submitting your code to review is to annotate your code. Yes, I know you all write readable code, but if you're using tools like GitHub pull requests, for example, you can leave comments in the tool to talk about what something does, particularly if you've chosen to use a pattern which is different to the rest of the application, or if there's a weird piece of code where you think you need to explain a bit more around what's happening or why. At the very least, it's worth writing a short description of what you did and anything you took into consideration when you wrote the code. This way, the reviewer has an idea that you've thought about this problem and you've already considered some of the pros and cons. Now, if you're reviewing code, you need to respond in a timely fashion. There's nothing more frustrating than having finished some work and then having to wait 2 weeks for someone to review it and give you feedback. Merging that code after 2 weeks is also going to be a nightmare, and the author won't remember what they were doing when they came back to it in 2 weeks' time. So review in a timely fashion. I know that dropping everything to review someone else's code sucks, and the context switch is a killer. However, the context switch has to be paid by the reviewer and the author anyway. Shorter review cycles will make it less painful. As a reviewer, when we leave comments, we should be constructive. Be considerate of the code author. They did the best they could when they wrote that code. The author did not just throw something into the IDE and go, oh, well, whatever, I'm sure it's fine. If you're constructive, the author is more likely to listen to your suggestions. Remember, the comments should relate to the code and not to the author. An if statement here doesn't seem to be the right choice. It's somewhat better than, you must be stupid to use an if statement here. I personally like to leave praise in code reviews. If code review comments are always about things that are poor or confusing or not great, as an author, you're not going to want people to review your code. So it's good to say, oh, I really like the way you applied this pattern here. Or, oh, this code is really readable. Remember that positive feedback reinforces good habits, and this is what you want. I would also argue it takes less time to write a positive comment than a negative one. This is great, I love what you did here, instead of, this is not great for these 3 reasons and you should consider doing X, Y, and Z instead. Which leads me on to my next point. Your comments should be specific. They should give the code author clear ideas about why the reviewer thinks this code should be improved and what action should be taken to address the issues. I personally like to see a priority. For example, this is a showstopper. I will not let this code go forward until it's been fixed. Or, this is a question, I'm just a bit confused. Or, this is a nitpick. I wouldn't have done it this way. Maybe in the future you might want to bear that in mind. When the comments are specific, I, as a code author, know what I need to do, including which comments need a change or a response, and which ones are optional, and maybe just for me to learn from in the future. Finally, at the end of the review, we should consider accepting or rejecting a code review. Although I prefer to accept the code or raise a concern. I don't want to reject someone's code, it feels a bit mean. I might raise a concern and say, okay, well actually, I'll accept it if you can address these specific problems. The concerns should be listed and prioritised, and you can't reject a code review without leaving comments about what needs to be changed in order for the code to be accepted. Once the code has been reviewed, the next step should be clear. Does it get merged? Are there things which need to be changed? Is there someone else who needs to look at it? What happens next? If the code needs to be changed, there are responsibilities for the code author. Once again, respond in a timely fashion. Respond to comments and close any discussions which have been resolved. Remember, the goal is to get the code into production, not to leave it lying around and rotting and adding waste to your code base. You want to resolve the code review as fast as possible. So as soon as everything's addressed, the person responsible for finishing the code review needs to flag it as accepted or closed or whatever your terminology is. If the review happens before merging the code should then be merged as soon as possible so it can be deployed and used. So code reviews are much better when the process is clear. You need to know why you're doing the code review, or you won't be able to decide on any of the other aspects. You need to decide when the review happens and when it's signed off, who is responsible for reviewing the code, and who is responsible for deciding it's good to go. Where you do the code review impacts the process as well, and only when you know why, when, who, and where can you list what you should be looking for in the review. Finally, when you know the answer to all these questions, you can answer the how to define a process that works for you and your organization. Remember, the goal is to ship the code, not to prove how clever you are. You're working together to get the code out into production and used by your users. Thanks for watching. Thanks also to our patrons who support this channel and get loads of other goodies from being part of our Patreon community. If you're interested in being part of the community, check out the links in the description below.